What I want to share with you today is how I learned to nose wheelie, and this was a process. So I think what may distinguish this from others is that I'm going to break it down from a beginner standpoint in each of the different steps that I learned in order to be able to pivot that rear wheel around to the side in a nose wheelie or a rear wheel hop. The first step is just doing a stoppie. So coming in with a little bit of speed and actually jumping up and forward slightly and putting weight on the handlebars and pushing them forward. Allowing my knees to bend up underneath me is going to let that rear wheel come up into the air. Now, one of the common things that happens, especially in less than ideal traction situations, is that the front wheel is going to push or skid, and that's because you're applying the front brake too early in the process. You actually want to be jumping forward and then pressing that brake, and doing so in that order is going to allow the bike to kind of tip forward rather than skid forward. The second portion of this is that I'm actually going to be trying to do this with less speed. That's going to require better technique. So I'm really going to be emphasizing my hips back and then jumping forward like I'm trying to push my head over the bars in order to get that bike up onto the front wheel, pressing that front brake, and then pushing my arms forward, allowing that bike to rise up underneath me. Working on a slower approach with better technique is really going to help in that nose wheelie or stoppie before we try and pivot that rear wheel to the side. Now, the next portion of this came after hours of frustration with the bike leaned to the inside during a turn. I just couldn't get the rear wheel to pivot to the outside. A lot of that has to do with the head stem geometry. So during a turn, the bike is leaned to the inside, and going ahead and throwing weight onto that front tire is actually gonna bring the rear tire even further to the inside. I want it to go to the outside. So one of the best ways to do that is, instead of leaning into the turn, to actually stand up that head stem so it's straight up and down. This is going to allow the rear wheel to pivot easier to the outside. Now, this is just a stage in the learning. I'm not saying you should always do your nose wheelies coming in straight, but this is helpful as a beginner learning how to initially get that rear end to switch from one side to the other. So in this portion, I'm coming straight in rather than on a turn, and in order to get the rear end to shift over to the side, I'm going to be doing two different things. The first of which is I'm going to be leading with my hips. Now, what does it mean to lead with my hips? Well, my hands are stuck on the handlebars, they're not going anywhere. My feet are stuck in on the pegs, they're not changing any position, so the only thing I really have to throw is my hips. Now, one way I can show you an example of throwing your hips is simply by standing in front of the bike, still with your hands on the handlebars. So in this simple drill, I'm going to keep my hands where they are on the handlebars, but in order to get my body further to one side or to the other, I'm not going to be leading with my head. I'm actually going to be leading with my hips. My feet are going to stay here until I jump, and I'm going to try and get as far around the bike as possible. So in doing so, I'm actually teaching my lower body how to move in order to get some of that sidewards momentum, some of that lateral movement. Now, the second portion of this is in order to stay in body balance and in order to continue to push that rear end to the side. When I'm wanting to hop the rear tire to the right, I'm actually going to be pushing forward a little bit with my left hand. And doing so, once I've got the rear end up off the ground, if I push forward with this hand, it's actually going to assist in driving that rear end even further around. Now, landing in body balance so that you're not tipping and falling to the outside or to the inside takes a lot of time to get. In fact, I would say most of it has to do with how far you're throwing the rear end, letting go of that front brake so you can actually bring it down sooner, or where your head is. So if you're typically falling to the outside, well, keep your head a little bit further in, and now when you lead with your hips, your whole body is going to be landing in balance. I've got a lot more as it relates to landing in balance and working on those under and over rotation corrections in the course that I'm actually setting up. So I just want to give you guys an introduction as it relates to these rear wheel hops and getting more success at them. You can do them while coming in on a turn, especially after you've gathered the beginning elements of this. But I think those foundational steps are really helpful for a beginner in order to get started on nose wheelies. Now, the course goes into static rear wheel hops, full bike hops, doing them on a turn, all kinds of stuff. Sam Fastle does a great job explaining how to use this technique, including in a section, and I want to introduce this course to you guys for free. So for the month of September and October, you guys can get this mini course as a way to kind of get a sample of all that the Trials curriculum has to offer. Appreciate you guys checking out the course by clicking on the link below. You guys can have free access to that for the months of September and October, and if you like it and you want more, I've got over 100 videos in the full Trials curriculum, including this and many others.